At this point, what we'll do is we will move to the 11:30 session, move now, the opportunities, the public commenters. Excuse me, we have 5 commenters, and you'll be limited, as you know, to 5 minutes. I'll give you a 30-second warning to try and be helpful, but then at 5 minutes I ask you that you end your remarks. So what we'll do is the public commenters will speak from the podium, and we'll begin with Carl Brooks, LBJ School, University of Texas at Austin.
Mr. Chairman, is it the practice to distribute copies of testimony? Could I give that to a staff person?
Just to Jessica, please.
All right. Dr. Samet, members of the committee, I'm Carl Brooks. I'm a clinical professor of public leadership at the LBJ School of Public Affairs, University of Texas at Austin. For about 7 years, I was a senior EPA appointee during the Obama administration. I served with both Administrator Lisa Jackson and Administrator Gina McCarthy. For 5 years, I was the regional administrator in the American Heartland region. That's the 4 rectangular states at the Kansas City regional office. And then for 2 years, I was the agency's national operations manager as the acting assistant administrator for administration resources management. In a sense, everything that wasn't program or science work came through our office. Most of my testimony is drawn from my regional experience, in part because regions at EPA are the place where environmental protection and public health protection is delivered on the ground to people. And the regional administrator is responsible for making that happen. So career environmental protection specialists on the ground in the field, whether at EPA or at our state and tribal partner agencies, depend upon IRIS as the gold standard for toxicity and risk assessments. They're used by people who have way more skill than I do. I'm a lawyer and a historian by training in handling everything from complex, time-sensitive response actions, either under CERCLA or RCRA, or informing the regulatory programs such as air quality that's often done by our state partners and water quality. So career professionals in the field use IRIS on a steady basis. One of the things that they told me they appreciated about it is that although it's very scientifically sophisticated for reasons that Dr. Bahadori and Christina have been sharing with you, it's also easy to apply, especially at times in very time-sensitive actions. So it is considered the gold standard. Another thing that I did when I left the region as the agency's chief human capital officer is that I was responsible, and the people I supervised were responsible for defending the principles of an independent civil service, of people who were qualified to do their jobs, and at times helping them respond to the very intense political and economic pressures that the agency has been under from its inception in 1970. At this time, in 2017, 2018, those career scientists, Dr. Bahadori, her colleagues, other people in the Office of Research and Development, are facing some of the most intense and sustained pressures on their independence and on their responsibility to do peer-reviewed science in the history of this agency. Certainly in the time I was with the agency, I've never witnessed that kind of pressure, IRIS being one of those pressure points right now. And in the books that I've written and the articles I've written about EPA, I have never seen the amount of pressure being dedicated to career science at the agency. It's clearly a time of important decisions that have to be made by the American people, by their elected representatives, and in turn informed by your work as the guardians of American science about how peer-reviewed professional science will be done by career professionals. Going back to the regional experience, which informs most of what I'm saying here, I talked quite a bit with our retired science division director in the Kansas City region, himself a PhD chemist and formerly the head of a state environmental agency before he came to work with EPA. He retired a couple of years ago. He said that the people at NCEA who do IRIS assessments are seen by him and his colleagues, both in the program offices and in the regional science offices, not as wizards. They're not white-coated wizards. Instead, they're seen as career professionals who do an excellent job at their very difficult task. Their work products are invaluable to EPA staff and to partner agencies. The written testimony I've shared with you indicates the value that IRIS plays at the EPA regional and operational level. It's essentially the default place to go in figuring out what the risks are for chemicals, either in our regulatory work, which has a longer horizon, or in very short time-sensitive response actions. So for those reasons, I'd encourage this committee to acknowledge the work that's being done by Dr. Bahadori and her colleagues to implement your earlier recommendations. And again, to use your position as the guardian of American science, to speak up for the people who are your professional peers. Thank you, Dr. Salmon. I appreciate it. If there are questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Okay, thank you very much, and your model of being on time. And given the time constraints, we're actually not intending to do questions. So.
Okay, the light helped. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, all right. Okay, next, Lisa Shannon, Edison Wetlands Association.
Good morning. My name is actually Shannon Lisa. It's a little confusing, two first names. I'm the program director of the federally recognized nonprofit Edison Wetlands Association, also known as the EWA, based in New Jersey. The EWA was founded in 1989 with the mission of protecting human health and the environment, and has been working for over 25 years to clean up and restore contaminated sites throughout the nation, including a host of high-profile Superfund National Priorities List sites. EWA conducts site inspections and environmental sampling, provides detailed recommendations to environmental and health agencies, and disseminates technical information to communities so that they can meaningfully participate in the cleanup process. Any objective scientists and concerned activists like ourselves know that IRIS is the lifeblood to EPA's mission of protecting human health and the environment. Evaluation and analysis of chemicals through IRIS establish benchmarks to assess whether exposures on Superfund sites are under control or pose an unacceptable threat to human health. This makes it possible to allocate resources to address unacceptable risk in communities experiencing the greatest risk from chemical exposures. IRIS assessments also directly influence permit requirements and regulations at RCRA sites, where generation and transport of hazardous material is ongoing, as well as cleanups on federal Department of Defense and Department of Energy sites. The IRIS program should therefore not be viewed under narrow lenses, as no government decision and conclusion, especially the environmental protection agencies, occur in a vacuum. An efficient and accurate method by which to assess contaminants, especially those considered to be emerging contaminants, is of critical importance. If the federal government fails in this mission, the body count of Americans, including our most vulnerable populations, will continue to rise. Along with its intention of providing a consistent resource from within the EPA, the IRIS program has evolved to be an easily accessible resource to the public, community organizations, and non-governmental organizations, including those without a background in toxicology, anatomy and physiology, risk assessment, or environmental science. The importance of this resource can be measured by the fact that, according to EPA in 2008, users accessed IRIS databases over 9 million times per year. It is reasonable to assume that this figure has likely increased significantly, as EPA has taken measures to increase transparency and improve public participation in its IRIS assessment process, though there still remains room for improvement. Enhancements to make the IRIS program more transparent and publicly accessible and understandable will continue to give communities meaningful involvement in the assessment process. So our organization is based in New Jersey. We're the most densely populated state in the union. We have the most sites on the national priorities list and over 25,000 other known contaminated sites. EWA has firsthand knowledge of the urgency of ensuring chemical assessments are completed in an efficient and accurate manner. We currently pursue the remediation of 75 hazardous waste sites, including 16 Superfund sites throughout the United States. As the IRIS program is a foundational EPA program and is used to make scientific-based decisions on remediation strategies, its evaluation cannot be made without discussing communities that have been and will be impacted by decisions based on its assessment's conclusions. The 500-acre Ringwood Mines landfill Superfund site is located less than 1 hour from New York City, and upon a first glance appears to be an oasis of lush trees, mountaintops, and rich in American history. The site is home to Ramapo Lenape Native American families whose ancestors mined the iron that built America's first rail lines, the cannons fired in the Revolutionary War, and the Capitol Dome here in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, this site has a more sinister history, however. In the 1960s and 70s, Ford Motor Company's Mahwah automobile manufacturing plant turned Upper Ringwood and the Ramapo Lenape families, who call it their ancestral home, into their own personal toxic waste dump by disposing of toxic paint sludge and drums leaking lead, benzene, and antimony directly onto the ground and in mine shafts. Believing that the site was adequately cleaned up, the site was removed from the NPL list in 1994, only to be added again in 2006. Nearly a decade later, the emerging contaminant 1,4-dioxane was sampled for and detected for the first time in the mine shafts and surface water. 1,4-dioxane is one of the 10 preliminary chemicals selected for reevaluation under the amended TSCA. A report last year...
Could you wind up, please? You're at the 5-minute mark.
Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That was a quick wind up. Sorry. Yeah, okay, thank you. Next, Marco Kaltofen from the Worcester Polytechnic Institute. If I didn't quite get the name right, I apologize.
That was actually pretty good.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I'm a registered professional civil engineer, and I'm also an affiliate research engineer at Worcester Polytechnic Institute. As a civil engineer, I've worked in private practice, and I've had a career-long interest in the IRIS program. So I want to thank you for the opportunity to speak about improving the IRIS process. As everyone's saying today, the IRIS data that is generated underpins a large fraction of our regulatory system. It provides the scientific basis for decisions made by federal, international, state, and local agencies. And IRIS is also the major point of entry for peer-reviewed science in our administrative decision-making. You know, in effect, IRIS provides a consistent scientific framework for environmental and health-based decision-making, and it does so for our entire country. But at the other end of the scale, from national impacts, it's a very significant impact that IRIS has, is it dramatically affects the life and health of individuals in communities in specific towns in our country. As a field engineer, I work with these families, and I see the outcome of the IRIS process in their lives and for the sites that they are interested in. I've probably met with thousands of neighbors and workers at chemical production facilities in the US, and I've had the chance to inspect and audit some of these facilities and see how manufacturers and operators actually try very hard to meet their IRIS responsibilities. Very personally and directly, I've been working with citizens in Laplace, Louisiana, and I've helped them understand the mass of air quality data that they get and the IRIS information that they review and how that impacts their lives. And I've had the chance to actually work with individuals and test the metabolites of chloroprene that are in their bodies because they are exposed to chloroprene in this community. I don't think a lot of those people understand the IRIS process, but unsurprisingly, they have some very big concerns about what's happening with this committee. So what I wanted to say is, for their benefit and for the benefit of our regulatory system, I think it's very important that we be very reluctant to exclude any peer-reviewed scientific data that we have when we do the IRIS assessments. And that means not excluding data based on its country of origin. That means that we shouldn't be excluding data solely because we have some concerns about interspecies uncertainties, many of which will never be resolved. We don't have enough animals to do testing on in order to resolve many of those toxicological uncertainties. And of course, obviously, we don't have that kind of human data, even within orders of magnitude of what we have animal data for. So over-reliance on human data means that we would miss many of the risk opportunities that exist for some of the chemicals that IRIS has been assessing. I know I have to keep to 5 minutes, but what I really want from this committee's process is to make clear how important it is to individual communities, not just practicing engineers, what it means that science remain open, diverse, peer-reviewed, that we are selecting from the largest universe of the best scientific data that is available. I know this seems very fundamental, but with every change of administration, there are new priorities. There are decisions about, should IRIS stay within ORD or should it move to a different branch of our government? I think ORD and IRIS have worked together very well as scientific partners. What I want to do is remind people that for the people that are the true users of your data, they're not the technicians, as professional as they are in the organization. The people that use IRIS data every day are the people who live next to the chemical plant in Laplace, Louisiana, or who are raising a family. And they're the ones who want to make sure that we protect the scientific integrity of this process from the very beginning. And IRIS is the foundation of that scientific process in our government. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we'll move on to Anne Lahure from Chemical Management Associates.
Hi there. So I'm Anne Lahure, Chemical Management Associates. What I do is I work with small trade associations that have issues related to science. And so my direct involvement with the IRIS program in recent years has been with the Naphthalene Council and also with a pavement council that is concerned about PAHs. And the previous speakers today illustrate why it is that industry cares, because our customers care and people who are impacted, neighbors, workers, et cetera, care, and they use IRIS. So the very first time that I ever picked up the phone on behalf of an industry group and called IRIS was in 1999. Between 1999 and 2011, when the formaldehyde report came out, we went through 3, 4, by my count is actually 5 rounds of IRIS reform. They changed the process every couple of years because something wasn't working. From 2011 until today, I would argue that we've been in a continuous process of IRIS reform. And, both with Dr. Cogliano and now Dr. Badori and Chris. So what I wanted to say was I've thought a lot about what is the issue. Why can't we get this right? And I was really happy that Tina said that they were reaching out and opening up the process, in part out of that necessity because of losing people, a lot of us who were in the room. I know a lot of you folks, because we've been in meetings like this continuously. I think the last time I was in this room was yet another IRIS review by another Academy panel. So my assessment of what's wrong is just that, the openness. Science moves pretty fast these days, much faster than the IRIS program can move, or that the government can move. When IRIS was founded in the 80s and even in the 90s, there were hardly any environmental science overall, much less environmental toxicology or environmental epidemiology programs in academia or being funded by industry or by other groups as well. Now, today that's not true. Today, every university and every college has environmental science departments, and they focus on different things. And I'll just give you a little example. So last year in January, IRIS issued a final report. There's two parts to IRIS, as everybody knows. There's the hazard assessment part, and there's the dose response assessment. The dose response assessment, which was updated in January 2017, needed to be updated because in the 1990s, FDA and the Dutch equivalent of their public health service had conducted bioassays, and they found a very different result than the provisional results that were in the original IRIS assessment for that chemical, which had been done in the 1980s, essentially. That needed to be updated because it was almost an order of magnitude difference in the oral slope factor. And so people had been making decisions based on IRIS based on 20 years old, data that was 20 years out of date. So that needed to be updated. But at the same time, the hazard assessment needed to be updated. But unfortunately, it got better in the final than it had been in the original draft. But it relied heavily on what had been done on IARC in the 1980s. And since then, by my count, there were 4 peer-reviewed in the general literature systematic reviews done for occupational exposures to that class of chemicals. And there was one that had been done by a province in Canada. So there were 5 available systematic reviews that could have been used and adapted into the IRIS. So, I have great hopes that this round of review will be productive and that by reaching out to others, you'll be able to catch up and, hopefully become part of the scientific conversation rather than, as often seems to happen,
30 seconds.
Having IRIS be outdated by a few years at the time that it hits the street. So that's what I had to say, and I thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. And to our last commenter in this session, Tracy Woodruff, University of California, San Francisco.
Hello, and thank you for taking my comments. My name is Tracy Woodruff. I am a professor in the School of Medicine at the University of California, San Francisco, and I run the program on reproductive health and the environment. Our program advances scientific inquiry, clinical care, and evidence-based decision-making to improve health by preventing harmful chemical exposures. I'm going to be providing high-level comments that summarize our more extensive written comments we will be submitting to the committee. Before coming to UCSF, I worked at US EPA from 1994 to 2007. As part of my job, I was an internal reviewer of IRIS risk assessments for the Office of Policy. I've had many years of experience reviewing, commenting, and contributing to IRIS and risk assessment at EPA. So to give some historical perspective, the IRIS program started as more of a clearinghouse for risk assessments, where volunteers were solicited across the agency to contribute risk assessments. However, it became clear that this led to inconsistent and variable quality risk assessments. So to improve the scientific basis and quality, IRIS was centralized in ORD with a dedicated staff of scientific experts in environmental health to do these risk assessments. The centralized program contributes to a more consistent and higher quality in risk assessments, and having the program independent of the program offices serves to limit the influence of the regulatory programs, which have other types of issues that they're responding to. So as commenters have noted, IRIS assessments are considered the gold standard of hazard and dose response assessment and are used to support decision-making not only across the agency, but in other federal agencies, states, localities, tribes, and international agencies. And it plays a critical role in supporting EPA's mission of protecting public health. I think there are several particularly noteworthy changes and achievements that has recently occurred with the IRIS program, and I'm going to highlight a few here and are, again, covered more detail in our written comments. First of all, the IRIS program and NCO leadership are well positioned to ensure a very successful program. So as has been noted, Dr. Chris Thayer was appointed to lead the program in 2007, January 2017. She previously served as the director of the NTP Office of Health Assessment and Translation, and there she spearheaded efforts to adapt and integrate state-of-the-art systematic review methodology for use in environmental health evaluation. So she has substantial expertise in systematic review, machine learning and automation, and chemical evaluations, and she has, in the short time she's been at EPA, brought significant improvements in this area. She has also been working with Dr. Tina Bahadori, who is appointed to lead NCIA also at the same time, and who's also had extensive experience and expertise in leading chemical hazard assessments. And I am confident that they will be able to continue to lead this program where it needs to go to support and integrate the highest and best science to make the best risk assessments. Also, number 2, note that IRIS is actively integrating transparent, objective, and state-of-the-art systematic review methods to summarize data and to do their hazard and risk assessment, which is directly responsive to recommendations from several NAS reports. And with the current leadership and skills, they will be successful in doing this. They use collaborative approaches in adapting methodologies for using chemical assessments. I know we have participated. They have a network of expert collaborators from academia, clinical sciences, environmental health, domestic and international public agencies, such as NTP, ATSDR, the Cochrane Collaboration, and GRADE. This will ensure the program is always up to date and is integrating best practices in the science evaluation. And while IRIS has made several important achievements in recent years, there are still some areas for improvement, and in particular, we recommend, 1, that the IRIS program continue to be funded and maintained in its current independent location within the Office of Research and Development. 2, that the IRIS program continue to implement NAS recommendations that will improve the scientific basis of the IRIS assessments, with a particular focus on science and decisions and phthalates and cumulative risk. This includes improving methods to account for multiple chemical exposures, variability due to vulnerabilities from life stage, genetics, pre-existing conditions, and others, and social factors. And finally, to implement the recommendation to harmonize non-cancer with cancer risk assessments, which includes not assuming a threshold in the population unless data are shown otherwise. And the agency should continue to support efforts to actively include a broad set of stakeholders, and in particular those that can be affected by chemical exposures, as was spoken by one of the previous speakers, including members of the general
30
public,
seconds, Tracy.
That's great, and environmental justice communities. As a note, science evolves, and so should scientific practices, and IRIS is doing that to evolve with that. And so the commitment of EPA to scientific independence and integrity, it is essential to have IRIS, continue to support IRIS in its current location and its efforts to improve the scientific basis of risk assessment. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And let me thank all the commenters for your input. It's helpful, of course, to the committee, and we'll be hearing from more commenters later.